obviously, if it's still a competition at that time, why wouldn't you start one and start the other? And then we would go from there. That was really what the conversation was. He wasn't wrong in what we talked about, which you've all known that they're going to play in the preseason, and someone has to go out there for the first snap. Thus, they would be the one that starts. But at this point, we're so far from that it's not really as important as what it kind of got made out to be.
So if you don't name a number one prior to Buffalo scrimmage, how do you...
He was picked in the 5th round. Now he's taking every first-team snap in Cleveland. Nobody saw this coming, not even the coach who has to decide his future. There's a moment in every quarterback's career where the noise around him either fades away or swallows him whole. For Shedeur Sanders, that moment is happening right now, in front of a training camp crowd in Berea, Ohio, under a head coach who refuses to hand him anything. This isn't a feel-good story, not yet. It's a pressure test, and so far, Shedeur Sanders is the only one in the building who looks like he isn't feeling the weight of it. Go back 1 year, draft night 2025. Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback some analysts once had going first overall, sits in a green room, watching pick after pick pass him by. Round 1 ends, no call. Round 2 ends, no call. By the time Cleveland finally selects him in round 5, the story isn't about his talent anymore. It's about the fall. It's about what teams saw that made them pass, again and again and again. That kind of public rejection doesn't just disappear. It follows a player into every practice, every rep, every interview. And for a rookie walking into a Browns quarterback room that already had 4 other arms competing for one job, it would have been easy to get lost in the shuffle. He didn't get lost. Fast forward to training camp 2026, the Browns quarterback competition is being called one of the most fascinating position battles in the entire NFL. 4 quarterbacks in the building, a shifting depth chart, a team whose entire season may hinge on getting this one decision right. And at the center of it, Deshaun Watson, the presumed starter, a former number 1 overall pick himself, entering the final year of a fully guaranteed contract worth $230 million. On paper, this shouldn't even be a competition. Watson has the resume. Watson has the money. Watson has the years of experience that a second-year passer simply doesn't have yet. But football doesn't care about paper. Through the opening days of camp, something started shifting. ESPN's Jeremy Fowler put words to what fans in Cleveland were already whispering, that Watson went into the spring as the clear favorite, and that Sanders had bridged the gap. Not closed it, bridged it. That distinction matters. Nobody is handing this job to a second-year player. But the gap that was supposed to be wide open is suddenly a lot smaller than anyone predicted. By the 4th day of padded practices, the story had a headline of its own. Sanders took every single first-team rep in team drills. Every one. Meanwhile, Watson was working with the second unit and still throwing interceptions, 6 of them across 4 practices, 3 of those coming in a single session. For a veteran on a fully guaranteed deal, that's not just a rough day. That's a red flag flashing in front of the entire coaching staff. And Sanders? 4 passing touchdowns through camp, the most of any quarterback on the roster. His first interception of the summer didn't even come until deep into that stretch, which for a young player facing NFL-level pass rushers for the extended time, is a number that turns heads.
You and the other coaches are meeting, and do you talk about who's ahead, who's doing well in this quarterback competition, or is that just...
For sure. No, I think to say who's ahead is a little extreme, but we always, we evaluate every day where our roster is, who's where. Try not to knee-jerk react on the one day. That's hard to do. We want every day to go smooth.
This is the part of the story where you'd expect the head coach to come out and declare a winner. That's how these stories usually go. Rookie outplays the veteran, fans erupt, storyline writes itself. Todd Monken didn't do that. Instead, when asked directly whether a starter needed to be named before the next scrimmage, Monken's answer was almost deliberately unremarkable. He said the rotation would simply continue. Natural rotation, he called it. No urgency, no declaration. Just, we'll keep going until we narrow it down. That single answer says more about this competition than any stat line could. Because if Sanders were clearly, undeniably ahead, you'd expect the coach to at least hint at it. Instead, Monken is doing something a lot of head coaches do when a competition is genuinely alive. He's protecting the process. He's refusing to let one hot stretch of practice reps turn into a media circus that puts unnecessary pressure on either quarterback. And that's where the tension really lives. Because outside the building, the pressure is already enormous. Fans are dissecting every rep on social media. Analysts are debating it on national television. Cleveland, a city that has burned through more starting quarterbacks than almost any franchise in modern NFL history, is watching a fifth-round pick outperform a $230 million contract in real time, and everyone wants to know what it means. Monken knows exactly how dangerous that noise can be. When reporters pushed him on whether the coaching staff talks about who's ahead in the quarterback room, he pushed back on the framing itself. Ahead is too strong a word, he said. What the staff actually does is evaluate the roster every single day, not chase one good practice, not overreact to one bad one, because chasing daily headlines is exactly how a franchise mismanages a quarterback competition that's supposed to shape the next several years. There's a discipline in that answer that a lot of fans don't want to hear. They want certainty. They want a name. Instead, they're getting patience. The kind of patience that comes from a coaching staff that has clearly been burned before by naming a starter too early and living with the consequences. But patience doesn't mean nothing is happening behind the scenes. Think about what it actually takes for a fifth-round rookie, now in year 2, to force his way into first-team reps ahead of a former number 1 overall pick. It's not just arm talent. Anyone with an NFL arm can complete throws in shorts during OTAs. What Sanders is doing now, with pads on, with a real pass rush, with installs piling up day after day, is proving he can process an NFL defense at NFL speed. That's the thing that separates a promising camp arm from a legitimate starting quarterback. And through the first stretch of padded practices, he's been doing exactly that. There's also something happening off the stat sheet that's just as important. Teammates and beat reporters covering camp have noted the way Sanders carries himself in that quarterback room. Competitive, vocal, unbothered by the noise following him since draft night. That mentality matters more than people realize. Quarterback competitions aren't just won with completions. They're won in the meeting room, in how a player responds to criticism, in whether pressure makes him tighten up or lock in.
That's possible. I haven't gotten that far ahead. I really haven't. Like, okay, tomorrow's another install. We'll rotate where the quarterbacks are in terms of where they started, like all positions. It's always in flux. Do I think that, to answer part of that question, which is come Monday, would you like to have, okay, we've had 10 practices, right? Okay, where are we at? Where do we see the pieces, left at?
And this is a player who has already lived through the worst version of public criticism there is. He sat through an entire draft broadcast watching his name get skipped over and over on national television, while analysts picked apart everything from his game tape to his personality to his famous last name. If that didn't break him, a training camp battle with reporters asking pointed questions every day isn't going to either. Now here's the part of the story fans need to sit with for a second, because it's not as simple as Sanders is winning. Cleveland's quarterback room isn't just Watson and Sanders. Dillon Gabriel, a 2025 third-round pick, is still very much part of this competition. So is Talon Green, a rookie added in a 2026 draft. 4 arms, 1 job, and a coaching staff that has repeatedly said the same thing in different ways. Nothing is decided. Monken even acknowledged that the competition itself has been overblown in how it's been portrayed publicly. When asked about comments that had circulated about the quarterback battle, he pushed back gently, saying the situation wasn't as dramatic as it had been made out to be. Somebody has to take the first preseason snap, he said. That doesn't mean that player has locked up the job. It just means somebody has to go first. That's the tightrope Monken is mocking. He needs his quarterbacks competing at full intensity, without letting one preseason series or one hot week of practice spiral into a media narrative that puts unfair pressure on a young player who's still developing, or unfairly buries a veteran who's dealt with plenty of noise of his own over the years. And there's a human cost to all of this that often gets lost in the highlight clips. Roster attrition has been rough on this Browns team through the opening stretch of camp. 13 players out in a single practice at one point, injuries piling up unevenly across position groups. Through it all, the quarterbacks have stayed on the field, taking their reps, absorbing install after install, running the offense through a shifting cast of teammates around them. That's its own kind of pressure test, performing consistently while the pieces around you are in constant flux. Let's talk about Watson for a second, because this story doesn't work if he's just a villain standing in the way. Deshaun Watson has been through his own version of pressure, a massive contract that hasn't come close to paying off the way Cleveland hoped, injuries that have derailed multiple seasons, and a fan base that has grown increasingly restless watching that guaranteed money sit on the books year after year. He didn't ask for a rookie to push him this hard, this fast, and to his credit, nobody around the building is describing him as checked out or unwilling to fight for the job. 6 interceptions across 4 practices is a rough stretch, not a career epitaph. Quarterbacks have bad weeks in camp and bounce back once the install settles and timing sharpens. The question is whether Cleveland has the patience left to wait and see, or whether the numbers piling up in front of them make that patience harder to justify with every practice. That's what makes Monken's measured tone so interesting when you really sit with it. He's not just protecting Sanders from premature hype. He's protecting the entire quarterback room from a version of this story that turns into a public referendum before a single preseason snap has been taken that actually counts. Because once a fan base and a national media cycle decide a competition is over, it becomes almost impossible to walk that back, even if the coaching staff isn't ready to make that call yet. There's a phrase Monken used that's worth sitting with a little longer, that they try not to knee-jerk react on the one day. Football coaches say a version of that line all the time, but in this context it carries real weight, because the one day that gets clipped and posted and turned into a headline isn't the same as the full body of work a coaching staff sees across 10, 12, 15 practices. Fans see the highlight. Coaches see the install period, the way a quarterback handles a bad read on Tuesday and bounces back on Wednesday, the way he processes a blitz he hasn't seen live before. That gap between what the outside world sees and what the building actually evaluates is exactly why Monken keeps refusing to hand out a verdict.
Who's going to be what spot at receiver, right? What gives us the best chance to move the football? Right guard, right? You're like, okay, let's start to, if we can, right, which you'd like to, be able to start established, where you think you're at that moment.
You had 13 guys out yesterday, taking its toll. Is it just the natural evolution of
I
the
think
camp?
it is. It's unfortunate because we've got some positions that we really haven't had.
And it's not just the quarterback position that's in flux. Up front, the offensive line is still being sorted out in real time. Competition at right guard, questions about who plays where, decisions the staff has openly said they're still working through as install continues. A quarterback competition doesn't happen in a vacuum. Whoever wins this job is going to be throwing behind whatever 5 guys end up in front of him, working with whatever group of receivers and tight ends survives the attrition of a long training camp. Every piece of this roster is connected, and Monken's refusal to rush the quarterback decision is, in part, a refusal to rush any of it. There's also a quieter storyline running underneath all of this, the cornerback room dealing with its own version of uncertainty. Veterans and younger players competing for spots the same way the quarterbacks are, just with less national attention. It's a reminder that training camp isn't one storyline, it's dozens of them, running in parallel, all feeding into the same handful of roster decisions that will define whether this Brown season has a chance to mean something. So where does this actually go from here? If the early camp trend holds, Sanders taking the bulk of first-team work, producing touchdowns, limiting turnovers, while Watson continues to battle inconsistency, it becomes harder and harder for the coaching staff to ignore what's directly in front of them. Preseason games will only add more evidence to the file. Real bullets, real opposing depth charts, real evaluation under lights that actually count for something, even if the scoreboard doesn't. But if you've learned anything from Monken's answers so far, it's this. Nothing about this decision is going to be rushed. Not because the staff doesn't see what everyone else sees. They do. Monken said it himself. They see it more in depth than fans do, because of the film. But seeing it and declaring it are two very different things. Naming a starter too early can create locker room tension, media distraction, and pressure that a young quarterback doesn't need before he's proven it over live snaps against a real opponent. If you're following this story, this is exactly the moment to stick around, because what happens over these next few weeks could define the entire Brown season, and maybe the next several years of this franchise. Here's what makes this story genuinely compelling, beyond the wins and losses. Shedeur Sanders isn't trying to prove he belongs on an NFL roster anymore. He's already done that. What he's fighting for now is something much bigger, the right to be the guy a franchise builds around, after an entire draft class publicly decided he wasn't worth it in the first 3 rounds. Every practice rep is a small piece of that argument. Every touchdown pass, every clean read against a first-team defense. It's not loud. It's not a press conference moment. It's happening in the daily grind of training camp, install after install, rep after rep, in front of a coaching staff that's watching closely and refusing to say a word before they're certain. And that's the real tension driving this entire competition. Not who's winning today, because today doesn't decide anything. It's whether a former 5th-round pick can sustain this level long enough, consistently enough, under enough pressure to force a franchise's hand, even when that franchise has $230 million to wait. If this kind of story pulls you in, the underdog angle, the pressure, the real stakes behind an NFL quarterback competition, this channel is where you'll find more of it, so consider subscribing before the next update drops, because this battle is far from over. For now, all anyone in Cleveland can do is watch. Watch the reps, watch the rotation, watch Todd Monken's face for any hint of a decision he clearly isn't ready to make public yet. Because somewhere between a 5th-round pick nobody wanted and a $230 million contract that hasn't delivered, the Cleveland Browns might be building the next chapter of this franchise's quarterback story. And right now, nobody outside that building actually knows how it ends.
Didn't get the 2-minute period. Why was that?
What we do know is this. A year ago, Shedeur Sanders sat through the most public rejection of his football life, broadcast live for the entire country to watch. Today, he's taking first-team reps in an NFL training camp, outproducing a former #1 overall pick through the opening stretch of practices, and doing it with the same unbothered confidence that got him through draft night in the first place. Nothing is decided. Todd Monken has made that clear, over and over, in every answer he's given. But somewhere in that undissolved, still developing story is exactly the kind of tension that makes sports worth watching in the first place. A young player with something to prove, a veteran with everything to lose, and a coaching staff trying to get the biggest decision in the franchise right, one practice rep at a time. The next few weeks will tell us more. The preseason games will tell us more. But for right now, all Cleveland can do is keep showing up to watch it unfold, rep by rep, day by day. Because nobody, not even the head coach making the call, is willing to say out loud where this one is headed next. Think back to where this story actually started, because it's easy to lose that context once the highlights start piling up. This is a player who grew up under a spotlight most rookies never have to deal with, the son of a Hall of Fame cornerback and college head coach, a name that guaranteed attention before he'd thrown a single professional pass. That kind of upbringing cuts both ways. It builds confidence early. It also means every mistake gets magnified. Every slow start gets treated as proof of something bigger. Every good week gets treated with a level of suspicion that a quieter prospect never has to deal with. Draft night didn't just cost him money, it cost him the benefit of the doubt that most young quarterbacks get automatically. A first-round pick struggling in camp gets called a project. A fifth-round pick doing the exact same thing gets called a bust before he's played a real snap. Sanders has had to operate inside that double standard since the moment he arrived in Cleveland, and it's part of why what's happening in camp right now carries so much extra weight. He's not just competing for reps, he's rewriting how people are allowed to talk about him. That's the part of this story that goes beyond football, and it's exactly why it's resonating the way it is. Fans aren't just watching a quarterback competition. They're watching whether a very public humiliation can be answered, rep by rep, in a building where the only opinions that actually matter are the ones behind closed doors, not the ones on television. And here's the thing about Todd Monken specifically. He didn't inherit this quarterback room by accident, and he's not new to high-pressure quarterback decisions. A coach with his background understands exactly how fragile confidence can be at that position, and exactly how much damage an outside narrative can do if it gets ahead of the actual evaluation. His refusal to name a starter isn't indecision. It's a coach who has seen what happens when a quarterback room gets rushed, and he's not interested in repeating that mistake with a Browns team that's already had more than its share of quarterback instability over the last decade. So when you hear him say the rotation will simply continue, that installs will keep coming, that positions across the roster are still in flux, don't mistake that for a coach without a plan. It's the opposite. It's a coach building a decision methodically, one practice at a time, refusing to let a hot week or a rough week tip the scales prematurely in either direction. Whatever happens next, whether Sanders keeps climbing, whether Watson finds his rhythm and reclaims control, whether this whole competition stays unsettled deep into the preseason, one thing is already true. A fifth-round pick that half the league passed on is standing toe-to-toe with a former #1 overall pick making $230 million guaranteed dollars. And right now, on the practice field, in front of the only people whose opinion actually decides this, it isn't close to over. That's the story, not a verdict, not a headline. A young quarterback quietly forcing a franchise to take him seriously, one rep at a time, while the entire football world waits to see if the coaching staff's patience runs out before his does.